Okay, so in this session, we will be discussing the path to zero emissions. It's a big subject, and we are very time constrained. If you do have questions, get them to me, and I will make sure that they are answered. What we see on the screen right now is the registrants filled out a questionnaire, and one of the questions was, what are the challenges that you are facing and that you would like addressed in this event? And what I did was I took all of those, combined them together and sent them into a word cloud generator where the word you found most frequently is bigger. So what we're seeing here is cost, education, challenge, climate change, community, solar. So we're trying to use this to guide our presentations to you today. So this is collectively what you have been asking for, and we're going to try to touch on those. Okay, so this one is about zero emissions. Really, you've decided, you've got your team. Now it's where do we begin? And so we're going to start off with David Barrett, our architect here, and we'll take it from there. David.
Okay. Thank you. I think I'm going to have to stand up because I'll definitely need a chiropractor if I have to look like this the whole time. Because I'm going to show, architects have to show things, you know. So the idea that I put, do I need to use this? Okay. Okay.
Yep, you're good.
Move right to the side here. So thank you. It's fun to share this space with you because as we worked on this, we often try to envision it in its full celebration. And to me, this is one of the highest forms of celebration, what we're here for today and what continues to happen in these kind of places. So I guess I need the clicker. I will get it together. And is it just... what I put together was quickly some patterns that we've learned over the years that I think are transferable to all of you. And what we often are coming into with churches are overutilized and overworn facilities, overperforming in some ways for their spiritual intentions, but underperforming in terms of the environment. And so the idea here is that we are often coming in to try to lift the future of a congregation, to try to bring young people into this. Because if we're going to sustain anything, we need to sustain the future users. And so often we're coming into very stale, old, overused things. So when we came into this project, it certainly was that. To energize with vitality of design. And I'm adding, to me, if you're going to make a sustainable project, it has to do many things. It can't just be net zero, and it should be that, or carbon neutral. But the idea is that if it isn't beautiful, if it isn't functional, if it isn't comfortable, then we're not doing anybody any favors because we're going to work against ourselves. So here is the playfulness of a children's chapel for the Jefferson Unitarian Church. And so there we developed a project out of roster block, a recycled content material, thick-walled material, highly insulative. But it was really to have a place to bring the young people where they could create their own programs and they could create their own space. Here it was, again, children downstairs. That was a rabbit warren down there when we came in. It was dark, oppressive. The kids were afraid to go down there. They didn't know how to get out of there once they were down there. And so the idea of the multicolored floor is that we gave them a wayfinding clue, is just follow that. It's not the yellow brick road, but it's the barcode road. And the idea is that it helped organize the space and enliven it. We tried to drive light as much into it from above as we could. We had some great ideas at the beginning of using a glass floor right out here that would have been a shared light surface. But the nature of these projects is always that you have to get all the best ideas out there on the table, try to satisfy as many of the needs and dreams, but you're always editing and trying to figure out how do we stay creative in what we're doing, but be open to refinement and in a way, value engineering, it's called, meaning you got to make the budget work. So different ways to bring light in and energy in. This is a small, it's actually not a religious facility, it's a Waldorf school. But in Boulder, we were asked to do a kindergarten from an old building, an old manufactured building. So we took the manufactured building and we did straw bale barbells at the end of it, 2 arcing walls at the end that created a whole different kind of space. It reconfigured your perception of a building and of space, and it scaled it down to little children's scale. And the walls, being of straw bale, are 2 feet thick, and so the walls are inhabited by the young people. So sometimes it's light. And I'm a big fan of light. And here, one of the playful things about First UU was a passion that John and a number of the other congregationalists had, was to have kind of an Indiana Jones effect here, where we could track the sun, and at certain ritualistic times, in terms of the Earth's movement in the universe, we would know exactly where it was going to drop in, and we become a sundial, and it really reinforces our place in the universe. And to me, again, that's another message that comes in the side door sometimes. You don't have to scream messages. Sometimes it's an experience such as that. And this one I put out as one of the things is let your freak flag fly. If you have values, and that's an old Crosby, Stills and Nash song. David Crosby wrote it. Almost cut my hair is what that's from. But the idea of express who you are and express your values. This is a group obviously full of values of the mother here. And so allow it to be out there and take pride in it. And in that way you are putting out who you are, and you're in a way a change agent, just as sharing what you put your resources into and what you value in your particular community. This is a Unitarian church for the Lafayette Unitarian Church in Boulder. And here we're pulling together old pieces and new pieces, in this case doing a new sanctuary, but again expressing both the passive aspects and the active solar aspects of the building. And so again, I go back to In Praise of Light, and a quick quote by Luke Hahn, a famous architect, because that, we were taught that he was God. So, I thought he was God for all those years in architecture school. And then I found out he had like 6 families or something. So I don't think, but I sense light as a giver of all presences, and material is spent light. What is made by light casts a shadow, and the shadow belongs to light. And so this is an example that for the Abbey of St. Walburga. So this was a Benedictine monastery that we designed in Virginia Dale, north of Fort Collins, and for a group of Benedictine nuns. So it's a 14,000 square foot monastery made of roster block, but again, light, both daylight and the new world of light. You change the lights in your building, and that's the first step of saving a whole bunch of energy, and now you can still get qualitative effect out of it. So. And then here, our oculus in the old what was the original building is now the sanctuary. And there we have an oculus that brings in north light, keeps that harsh light out that we're often fighting, and hopefully enlivens and connects you. So the next pattern related to these things is reshuffle the deck. When you're dealing with an old building, the first thing is to try to use as much of the old things that you have instead of tossing them aside. And yet don't be so wedded to something that you're making bad decisions by holding on to the wrong part and not letting go of it. So it's a dance you have to do, and that's a group that needs to make those evaluations early on in a project. But here at the Unitarian Church in Jeffco, we took and put different functions in different parts of the old building. And in that way, it was less new construction, but it really put the right things in the right places, we believe. And here again, we're taking a small church and putting the education in a new structure, taking the administration and renovating it, taking the old communal meeting space or the sanctuary and making that the social hall or the fellowship hall, and building a new sanctuary that's really then the beacon out on the street that expresses the new. So I think we'll go through quickly. This is the Abbey of St. Walburga. That's using this roster block. So I would say think about what materials you can use that can tell your story and get you to the promised land of an effective building. And then to use your site effectively, embrace a garden, create outdoor rooms. The in-between spaces are as important as the spaces. In our climate, so much can go on outside. And when we talk about motivating our congregations and to action in this world of stewardship, that being outside is probably the first thing you want to do, is don't just think of inside space, but how do you make good outside space? So in conclusion, from the cover of Matthew Fox's book on compassion, we cannot win this battle to save species and environments without forging an emotional bond between ourselves and nature as well. For we will not fight for saving something that we don't love. And so I would be a proponent for biophilia as something to drive your project. So thanks.
Oh my. So it's about comfort, and it's also about beauty. And we can't divide, we have to integrate those two. So as you're starting your work, it behooves us to look around and see who we can ally with. One of the entities we can ally with is our municipal governments. Every municipal government actually requires a climate action plan. So if you can find those people that are active developing their climate action plan and you become friends with them, you will learn that you will find all sorts of resources you didn't know were available. Our speaker from the city of Boulder could not make it today, and I do have a video that he did, but we may not actually have time. If we do, I will go ahead and show that. But what I can do is offer you Ambra Sutherlin, who works with the county of Boulder in a similar fashion. She works with the Partners for Clean Environment, which is an advocacy for this work. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Ambra, and I'm going to get her slides up.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thank you for having me today. Figure out this, how close it needs to be to my mouth. But I work in Boulder, and I work for Boulder County. And as a whole, we're working on a lot of initiatives around sustainability. So the organization that I work for is the Partners for a Clean Environment program. And sorry, I thought it was a different slide. So we work with businesses in energy, water, waste, and transportation, and we have rebates available for businesses in solar, lighting, and HVAC. And so we work with businesses on that side of things. And then in addition, we also certify businesses in some of those areas. So businesses that are really doing an excellent job in all of those areas, they get a certification through our program. And we do have rebates and incentives, as I mentioned. We also have incentives for bike racks, aerators for water, pre-rinse spray valves for like the dish areas in commercial kitchens. But I wanted to talk a little bit today about some other, I guess, just other rebates and incentives, other areas that you might look for other financial incentives. And it sounds like, going around the room, most people are from either Denver or surrounding Denver, Fort Collins, I heard, Louisville, Lafayette, and Boulder. So I won't dive into the specifics in some of those areas, but just kind of keep it more general as far as where you can look for some resources. So with that, so looking at, as I mentioned, state, regional, local, city, and county, and then looking at your utility company for some of these resources and types of resources available, rebates, incentives, grants, and then financing. And this is a website that I refer people to quite often, and it's actually a statewide website, and it's actually a national program, which was developed by the U.S. Department of Energy. And you can just type in your specific state and then your specific city, and it comes with a list of resources for energy efficiency and renewables. I'll give everybody a second to get this website down. Okay. And then next, just looking at utility rebates. So probably majority of the city of Denver is Xcel. And in the county, we work quite often with Xcel to partner for rebates for businesses. But they do have rebates for lighting, HVAC, energy audits at discounted rates, energy saving programs, and discounted equipment such as programmable thermostats. And then in addition, they have residential incentives. But these are just some of the utility providers in Colorado that it looks like most of those programs do offer incentives. So say if you're, in the city of Fort Collins, or you're in Longmont, Platte River Power Authority has rebates and incentives as well. So look at your utilities to provide some additional incentives and financing rebates. And then just wanted to briefly talk about the Colorado Energy Office, because there are some great resources on there as well. And it's also a really good resource for updates as far as the latest technology, what's going on in the energy policy and the utility side of things. And then they do have information on renewable energy resources. So say if you're looking at geothermal, they have some more information. They actually have a map of like specific areas that are best for geothermal projects, was one of the things that I saw in there. And then transportation, if you're looking at EV charging stations, they have grant application on there called Charge Ahead Colorado that you can apply through that to get an EV charging station. And then commercial project for energy efficiency. So they have some information on financing, energy performance contracting, and grants. So be sure to look on their website for some more resources. And then I would say also look for nonprofit resources. This is one specifically that I refer a lot of nonprofits to, but it's a nonprofit energy efficiency program. And they do So if you represent a nonprofit organization that serves low-income families and individuals, they can provide funding for things such as installation of energy efficiency equipment and energy audits. And here's some of the qualifications that you need to follow in order to be able to apply for some of the incentives. And they do review the online application 3 times a year. And if you go to the website, they have the link for the application. And that's probably the bulk of what I have to share today. Later on, I'll be discussing a roadmap that I put together, and a lot of those resources are also inside of the roadmap. So with that, I'll turn it back over to David. Thank you for your time.
Okay, so now we're gonna dive back down, kind of take the inner look. The inner look, my wife and I actually did energy efficiency work on our home, a 60-year-old home, taking it from its 60-year-oldness to today. And in order to do that, what we did was we were able to find a coach. A coach is really important. And there are 2 coaches I know of here today. There is Sustainably Built, who you'll be hearing from, and there is Lightly Treading, or Treading Lightly. Lightly Treading. And what these coaches will do is to just gently herd you in the right direction, and I do mean lightly. So what we're going to do is we're going to hear from Mark Bloomfield, who is with Sustainably Built, one of the coaches that we're presenting to you today.
So I don't have any. Is this on? Okay. I don't have any slides. I figured that lots of graphs and data right after lunch might not be helpful. And I appreciate David's mention of gently guiding. Certainly in thinking about the word cloud that David had and the broad range of buildings, when we start talking about net zero, it's a pretty challenging concept when you're talking about, something that's fairly new or just remodeled versus a building that was built in 1895 or something like that. There are a lot of, it's hard to capture all of that in just speaking for a few minutes. What I would say is that when we hold the idea of net zero, and even I could give you 5 different definitions of net zero. So coming up with an idea of what net zero is to you, we often say there are no net zero buildings. There are only net zero occupants, because it all depends on how you use the building. If you have a net zero building and all of your congregants have to travel 20 miles in order to get to it because it's out in the middle of nowhere, that's not incredibly helpful. So, I get that it can be overwhelming to come up with a definition of net zero and then look at it versus where you're at. So what I would offer is, come up with your definition of net zero and hold it lightly and think of it comprehensively. I'm certainly a buildings guy, and I'll talk a little bit about the path to net zero when it comes to buildings, but I'll also talk about just the broader notions of what can be done. Certainly one of those words that was up there that was a big one was cost. So the first thing that I'll say is a lot can be done at very low cost. One of the really important things would be if you have an existing building, maybe you don't have a budget right now to do a whole lot, is to come up with a plan. And when I say a plan, I mean your boiler or your furnace is going to have to be replaced. And if it's 15 or 20 years old, come up with a plan whereby you know what you're going to do when it goes out in the middle of the winter and it needs to be fixed right away. That way, if you've got a multi-$1,000 repair on your hands, at which point, maybe we actually need to just go ahead and replace it right now with the plan that you've already come up with. What you don't want is to have to come up with that plan when you're in an emergency situation and you need to spend a bunch of money right then. Again, with kind of the low-hanging fruit, there's a lot that can be done with what we call commissioning. Commissioning of a building is basically looking at the systems and are they operating correctly? Are the systems running efficiently? And also, do you have a programmable thermostat? And if so, is it actually programmed correctly? This is something that you can do in probably about 15 minutes and can have a huge impact on both your energy. And of course, when we're talking about energy, we're talking about cost savings. So just making sure that things are really taken care of on the basic level. Are things operating correctly? Is the building set back when it's not occupied? That sort of thing. From there, certainly on older buildings, an energy audit and just a discussion with someone like Paul or myself, Paul with Lightly Treading, or myself, or others that provide similar services. There are definitely utility opportunities for rebates, like Ambra mentioned, for that type of work. Again, audits can identify some really low-hanging fruit. Maybe it's a question of an attic that nobody ever goes into and it's just not very well insulated. That's a fairly easy fix. If it's older windows that need to be replaced, that starts to get more expensive. And so an audit can really identify where where the low-hanging fruit is, and it can help you with that plan that I mentioned. It's definitely a big part of the plan that will help you just come up with a sequence that makes sense. And maybe it's something where there's some work that can be done. A lot of one big piece would be air leakage. If there's a lot of air leakage in the building, then in the wintertime when warm air leaks out, you've then got 10-degree air that needs to be heated up. There's a huge energy penalty there. There's also a lot of comfort there. And so air leakage is potentially something where maybe, you can get a group of your community that can actually do that at a fairly low cost. So there's definitely a lot of opportunity. Of course, then we get into, okay, you're planning a renovation or an addition. There's certainly, at that point, you can make decisions. Does it make sense to use existing heating and cooling equipment, or does it make sense to add to or upgrade that equipment while you're doing the work? Certainly, at that point, you want to have somebody on board who's going to get you the envelope that you need to have to either modify, if it's a renovation, to improve the existing envelope, or make sure that the addition is going to have an envelope that's going to be really low efficiency. And this is where I'll take off a little bit from the buildings aspect specifically. If you're planning an addition or a remodel, there's the energy piece that is involved with the actual building structure. But then there's also the energy piece, and David touched on this for sure, of the design. And I'll say that, we're definitely in a time where action is needed. And so my invitation is to be really creative and to be aggressive and to be willing to make mistakes. And I think that's a place I know I get caught up in sort of, like you're conservative, you want to make sure things work. But when you're talking about net zero, again, I alluded to the net zero building in the middle of nowhere. There's a lot that you can do because, the buildings that your congregations have are an amazing resource. And there's so much that you can do thinking outside the box. There's, how can you use the space more creatively? Maybe you open it up to other organizations so that embodied energy and that heating, which is going to happen anyway, gets put to better use. Maybe a design comes with just more flexibility so that it can be used in different ways. Maybe, it's looking at things like permaculture for the grounds where the community can actually have community gardens and can look at sequestering carbon and things like that. I think that the buildings themselves are a great resource, and I would just certainly invite you all to, yes, look at the envelope and the mechanical systems and the lighting. Those are all really great opportunities, but also look at how the building is used and how can you really think outside the box. The other piece of that is that a lot of churches are in dense areas, and so can opening it up as inviting other organizations and having events where the carbon footprint is lower for them because not everybody has to drive, that sort of thing. And so, yeah, I think, like I said, I would invite you all to certainly do what you can on the building, and look at the rebates. That's all really important. But when you're talking about net zero, think about sort of net zero for the community. The other piece of you have a congregation and maybe you can't afford to replace your mechanical system, but maybe you can get people to carpool, and that's going to be, a significant energy reduction. Just looking at other opportunities for energy reduction. If you can educate your congregants and they can do work on their home, that's still having a huge impact. Even again, if maybe, that 1895 building is not going to be able to be remodeled in an energy efficient way. So that's my invitation.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, so there's reduce, reuse, and recycle. And there's a reason reduce is first. And that is that low-hanging fruit. And speaking of low-hanging fruit, we are going to introduce Bill Brayden, who, here's the low-hanging fruit. Here's what it will do for you. In projects, what we will find is if you can come up with these early wins, these incredible cost savings that you can then roll into the work that you are really planning, you will begin to mobilize that team, because there's nothing that is more successful than building on success. And Bill will share with us an easy way to get to that success.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bill Brayden from Brayden Automation. I'm up the road in Fort Collins, Loveland. We were in Fort Collins and we moved to the Loveland Fort Collins Airport and didn't really realize it was actually in the city of Loveland, so we had to change all our phone numbers. So now we're technically from Loveland instead of Fort Collins, but I still call Fort Collins my home. So Northern Colorado is a huge regional economy now. It's like one big city if you've been up there lately. Today I'm going to talk to you about managing demand. People say, what's all this demand stuff anyway? I see it on my electric bill, but I really don't know what it means. So first of all, I want you to think about if you're going to reduce electric costs, there's two fundamental ways of doing that. One is you reduce kilowatt hours. And if you're reducing kilowatt hours, you're doing energy conservation. So fewer kilowatt hours, it makes sense. Fewer kilowatt hours, lower cost. But you're playing with real small numbers by doing that because we're talking about cents per kilowatt hour, typically about a dime a kilowatt hour. They have been creeping up over time. The other side of the picture is controlling demand, and that is energy management. And fundamentally, the purpose of energy management is not to reduce kilowatt hours, it's to reduce your energy cost. And sometimes I think about this as playing a game of electrical Tetris, because I'm moving blocks of demand from here to a later period of time so that I don't have a peak over here. I'm smoothing it out. So think about energy management as smoothing it out, and I'll explain a little bit why we're doing that. So, first of all, to define demand. Demand is a rate of use. And there's a couple of ways you can think about this. A lot of people think about it as the speedometer in your car, right? It's not the miles you've driven, it's how fast you're going right now. And that kind of is analogous to what we call instantaneous demand or current demand. So how fast are you going right now electrically in your building? That's our instantaneous demand. And that drives our peak demand. Now, most utilities in the United States use a 15-minute integrating period or demand interval for calculating their demand. Now, funny we should mention Fort Collins because on the commercial side above 50 kW use 1 hour. And should be noted too that the entire wholesale part of the electric business is on a 1 hour average. There is no 15-minute or 30-minute average in wholesale and generation. It's all 1 hour. So, and there are varying opinions on how come on retail you are selling it on the basis of a 15-minute demand instead of a 1 hour. Now that average demand drives your peak demand, and peak demand is what you get billed for every month. And it's the highest one demand interval during that billing period. And there's several different flavors of rates, but let's talk about the most common, and that is, first of all, before I do that, let's talk about here in Denver and in surrounding, we have XL Energy, and these are really the two rates that we're dealing with. We have small general service, and that is a kilowatt hour only, or an energy rate, no demand charge. But the kicker is you got to stay below 25 kilowatts. The other rate, once you've gone over 25 kilowatts, you transition to medium general service rate that's called the SG rate, and that goes up to 750 kilowatts, and then you transition to large power. But these are fundamentally the two rates that we work with here in Colorado in the XL territory. Just to make this simple, some people call this a two-part rate because you have monthly service charge and a kilowatt hour energy charge. This is known as a three-part rate: monthly service charge, kilowatt hour charge, and demand charge. Yes, sir.
Just to check my perception, these are all commercial rates.
That is correct. Right. Now, most utilities across the country do not offer demand rates. There's about 3,200 utilities in the country. For years and years and years, 15 of them, most of them were here several of them were here in Colorado, offered residential demand rates. As of last week, we're up to 44 utilities in the country. And most of these are driven by solar and the cross-subsidization problem that utilities are having because of solar and the argument of non-solar customers subsidizing solar customers. So that's a whole different ballgame, but demand rates are actually creeping into residential. But yes, sir, we are talking about commercial really here. So people ask all the time, why do they have a demand rate? What's this all about anyway? Well, Demand rates are an attempt to unbundle the costs of serving customers in the commercial and industrial environment because customers don't look the same. You know, a 7-Eleven doesn't look like a church, and a bowling alley doesn't look like a big box store or something. You could make, yes, sir. Okay. Man, I got to hurry. So that's what these rates are about, is to try to limit the cross-subsidization. And I tell people all the time, this is the biggest opportunity in the electric business because very few people understand how beneficial it could be. So here's just a snapshot of the current rates. And on the demand rate here, if we stay below 25 kW, we're paying these kind of numbers for kilowatt hours only. On the demand rate, the kilowatt hours are generated, or I'm sorry, they are broken out. And in addition to that, here's our demand charge. So what we're actually playing with is $23, give or take, a kilowatt. So every kilowatt that doesn't hit the meter, so to speak, is $23 that we don't have to pay XL. So long story short here, there are roughly 3,000 15-minute intervals in a month, and one of those is going to set your peak demand. So anything you can do to take this peak and level it out, you're going to save $23 in the summer, a little less than that in the winter, and keep that in your pocket. There's two games. There's the game that the MGS, where you're just trying to reduce each kW demand for that $23 a kilowatt in the summer that doesn't hit the meter. And the other game here is to stay below 25. Now, this is where this is really important for churches, small churches, is that the crossover between these two rates is about 6,000 to 7,000 kilowatt hours a month. And so if you have 1,000 kilowatt hours a month, you have to be on this under 25 rate, or you're just going to get killed on the SG rate because you have a big peak demand, but you have no kilowatt hours to support it. So a lot of smaller to medium-sized churches can take advantage of this by controlling that demand below 25 kW. And usually we're in the area of 25 to 35, you can get them down. If it's an all-electric, maybe up to 45 because you have a lot more things to control. But beyond that, you are on the SG rate, and there's nothing wrong with that. Except you're playing a different game with the broken out demand charge. So some benefits or consideration. These are really simple projects to do for installation. They're usually 1, maybe a 2-day installation. The return on investment is fast, so you can get an early win. The savings can be invested in other green projects. I tell people somewhat sarcastically all the time is, you're going to pay for a demand management system either way. The only difference is whether it's going to actually be on your building in 2 or 3 years, because if you don't pay for it, you're paying that demand charge. So if you look at the fact that if you invest in it and have it do its job, it will be a long-term benefit to you. Gain some green team credibility by having this. You can demonstrate the results easily to your congregation. Arthur's going to show you how you can get on XL's website and look at your peak demand a little later. And this, as David said, an easy way to get some momentum going. So anyway, if I can ever be of service, please don't hesitate to call me, and I'll just kind of skip this. I'm definitely a proponent of these other things: lighting retrofits, insulation. Insulation is key, because if you have a very drafty building that doesn't hold heat well, demand control just makes the comfort issue worse. So what we try to do is operate a demand control system in the background so nobody even knows it's there, because if there are comfort issues, certain people would rather not have it installed, but regardless of the amount of money. But as I said, if I can be of service, please don't hesitate to call anytime.
Okay, opportunity. Yeah, we like opportunity. And this is one of them.